Now I have the pleasure of announcing the next session, which is by one of the most uh, accomplished professors in journalism and mass communication in the country, Professor Mrinal Chatterjee from the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, Dhenkanal. He is a very well-known name, and he has been supporting us in this venture from Rajasthan and in Assam and in many other places. We were in Purulia just 2 days ago, and it was a delightful experience. Professor Dr. Mrinal Chatterjee is a journalist and media academic. He's worked in all media forms. Presently, he is the regional director of the Eastern India campus of the Indian Institute of Mass Communication, Dhenkanal, Odisha. He's published 7 books on journalism and mass communication in English and Odia, including his seminal work on the history of journalism in Odisha. He, along with the Press Club president, Mrs. Nyashishur, has edited an anthology of essays titled Gandhi as a Journalist and Editor. It has been published in Odia as well. And he was recently there at the Kolkata Book Fair, where one of his books was released. An accomplished fiction writer, he has published 7 novels and 6 short story collections, many of which have been translated into several other Indian and foreign languages. So over to Professor Dr. Mrinal Chatterjee and the students of University of Calcutta and St. Xavier's University, Kolkata.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Pandey, and thank you everybody for giving me this opportunity to speak to the students. Now, Dr. Rai has made my task much easier. He has so beautifully explained what is development, what are the parameters of development, and those 4 pillars on which the superstructure of development rests. Now I'll take from where Dr. Ray left. I'll talk about development journalism. Now, what is this development journalism? This this word, mind you, it was coined sometime in mid-1968 at an international gathering of journalists in Philippines. This term. And then by 1971, definition of this term came. The UN definition in 1971 of this brand of the journalism called development journalism was, and I quote, the art and science of human communication applied to the speedy transformation of a country and the mass of its people from poverty to a dynamic state of economic growth that makes possible greater social equality and the larger fulfillment of human potential. In a way, the 71 definition and concept of development journalism, the way it was framed then, agreed to what Dr. Ray was just explaining. It started with economic development, and then it tried to kind of explore other areas of development. Like Dr. Ray explained, education, health, freedom, political choice, governance, social support, all those parameters that he talked about. Now, pushing aside the complexities of development journalism looks at one, conditions in the areas where you are looking at and how to improve it. It exposes poverty, it exposes ill health, it exposes anything to do with development, and researches about its causes, consequences, and how to address it in those areas and states. So basically, development journalists bring attention to issues that are overlooked or underrepresented by other media and by largely political community. And second, they uncover the stories within the stories, revealing the multifaceted nature of underdevelopment. So this is what development journalism looks at. Now, the concept of development journalism is not as new as in 1968. In fact, if I look back to Gandhi's brand of journalism, which he practiced starting from Indian opinion in South Africa and followed it up with Swadeshi, Harijan, Navjivan, we will see the elements of development journalism in his brand of journalism. In fact, if I may quote from his autobiography, he said, one of the objects of the newspaper is to understand popular feeling and give expression to it. Now, compare this with the concept of development, which also factors freedom, which also factors choice to exercise your political thought. Gandhi said, another is to arouse among people certain desirable sentiments. This used to be the initial thrust of development journalism. Arousing among people certain desirable sentiments. The concept was, well, there are certain areas where people probably do not know or do not feel or cannot figure out what is good for them. Now, journalism will tell them that and give them a nudge to proceed in that way so that they will develop. This is one way of looking at development. I'll come to the three different ways to practice development journalism, or in three different ways development journalism could be practiced, or a mix of it. We'll come to that. And Gandhi said, and the third object of a newspaper could be fearlessly to expose popular defects. If something is wrong, fearlessly expose that. You may say, if you look at it from one perspective, you may say this is investigative reporting, but from another perspective, probably this could also come under the domain of development journalism. In fact, if I go even back, in Indian philosophy, the very purpose of communication is to serve others, is service. So in a way, good journalism, all good journalism has the seeds or kernel of development journalism. But having said that, right, you may ask me, direct accident holo, 5 dead, 2 injured, will that be development journalism? I say no, that's event reporting. But if you take this as a peg and probably go and find out what is the condition of trauma care, right? How do our medical facility engage with accidents? How fast somebody who has met with an accident can reach hospital and given the first aid? And all of you know, if that care is not given in the first 2 hours of any accident, things might turn worse. So if you look from this perspective, well, that comes in the domain of development journalism. So what I'm trying to tell you is this, that anything, if you look from development perspective, could be brought under the domain of development journalism. Any incident, any issue, if you look from development perspective, right, and treat that in certain way, right? How do you do that? I'll come back to that in the next part of my deliberation. Now, development journalism may cover, among other things, economic development, agriculture, food security, health, sanitation, medicine, employment thing, literacy, housing conditions, environmental sustainability, and lot more areas. As I just told you, probably anything under the sun from development perspective. Now, we will come to the three types of development journalism that I was talking to you about. One is journalism for development. This comes very close to the concept of development communication. Basically, development communication is communication about development and communication for development from communication perspective. Okay. Now, when you practice journalism for development, that precisely means that you have an idea about certain goals and you want people to reach that goal, then you are practicing development journalism in the perspective of journalism for development. The second could be journalism about development, where you critically analyze development. You look deep into development. You kind of try to figure out whether the plans, programs for development is actually fruitful or not, is actually triggering development or not, bringing about development or not. That's the second. And third is the way which will be closer to the domain of solution journalism, where you consciously try to find out solutions to social problems, solutions to problems hindering development. You consciously try to figure out, right? These are the three kinds of development journalism that can happen or you can practice. Now, let me tell you how to go about it. How do you really go and do it? But before that, let me also tell you that development journalism, if practiced honestly, ethically, and with credible data and figures, then it can be a great tool for social justice. It can be invaluable for any society. It can do a lot for the marginalized. It can do a lot for the people who do not have their voice, or their voice doesn't reach larger audience. It can be a great empowering tool for them. Now let me tell you, how do you practice? I'll end with a couple of caveats, but about that later. How do you do it? For development, how do you do it? But before that, you also have to understand what is the purpose. Purpose in practical terms, right? The first purpose is to draw attention. Draw attention to situations requiring social change. Draw attention to factors promoting social change. You have to draw attention to the problem. Let me give you a small example, right? Satidaha Pratha was there. It was there. And then people like Raja Ram Mohan Rai and others thought that it's inhuman. And they tried to bring this issue to the limelight They tried to draw attention to this inhuman thing, and they try to kind of create an awareness that this cannot continue. They wrote about that, which drew attention to all right-thinking people. There were oppositions also, right? Severe oppositions from conservative faction, right? In fact, some of his close associates also turned against him. He also took the help of the administration then and tried to engage with this issue from that area, that angle as well. Right? But first, to draw attention. Let me give you another example, right? Consider witchcraft. Branding mostly old women as witches and killing them. This happens in mostly tribal dominated areas. In Odisha, every year, almost over 100 such cases happen. It happens in Bengal as well, in Jharkhand as well, in several parts. And if you go deep into this, you will find that there are three primary causes. One is property. Second is probably superstition. And third is there is no opposition to it from their community. Or if there is, it's overpowered, right? But by writing constantly, by bringing it to limelight constantly, gradually this problem is being contained, gradually, slowly is being contained. So draw attention. Consider child marriage. There was a time when girls used to be married before maturity, at the age of 8, 9. It was considered sacrilegious if they attain puberty and then they are married. Right? Goridan, it used to be called. And then there were people who thought this is inhuman, it's not done. And they fought and they wrote and they tried to create public awareness about it. And gradually, slowly, the minimum marriage age was raised. Initially, it was raised to 12 years. Then gradually, it was raised to higher ages. Subsequently, it took years, but it happened. But it started with drawing attention to this area. Right? The second is engage. You need to engage people in issues and kind of propel them to debate, to dialogue, and therefore push them towards a logical conclusion. Right? This is also a fillip to democratic process. Second purpose, engage. The third purpose is to seek change. Something is definitely not right. Let's seek change. Right? Here, probably, you can suggest the roadmap to a change. Right? Recently, as Dr. Pandey just told you, we had been to Purulia. And we were taken to a project site which is called Matir Srishti, and there were several projects put together. We were there for about a couple of hours there. We had the opportunity to talk to people, and we could see that this kind of projects have triggered a kind of desire within the people to change. And probably they can see or envisage the picture of change. What will be my position if this project succeeds, changes? The area where we went used to be a huge crematorium, Shoshanchila. And then there were projects, and then things were put, including one butterfly park, a lake, small lake. There was a water body, it was dug further, and a small lake was made. Cropping, plantation, a self-help, women self-help group was engaged in helping with tourism aspect. A restaurant is run by them. The point that I'm trying to make is maybe journalists also can seek change, and along with seeking change, probably they can show the roadmap. Right? And fourth purpose is to spread an aura of positivity, in which the journalists can talk about people who have overcome heavy odds to rise. Consider Manji, who created the road where there was none, single-handedly, started solo, and probably then people joined. But he was the person who started it all. There was this person in Odisha, a blind man, who dug a pond because that village didn't have water. It was water stressed. There used to be a pond, but there used to be hardly any water. So he tried to do this, and he succeeded. There are people like that. And if you write about them, it spreads an aura of positivity. Probably it creates a ripple effect. Let me tell you another story. I was a district correspondent in a place called Baripada, which happens to be the district headquarters of Mayurbhanj district, a tribal-dominated district in Odisha, bordering Bengal. And it used to have dense sal forest. But as it usually happens after independence, people fell jungle and it was gone. This went on for 5, 8, 10, 20 years. And then suddenly people found that their major source of income was gone. Because their major source of income was to go into the jungle, get sal leaves, and make those parties and balls and all with sal leaves, right? So that was gone. So one person, he decided to rise up and face the situation right at its face. And he brought people together of his village, and they decided to protect the forest. The good thing of sal forest is it regenerates if you protect. So protecting a forest was a huge task. He also asked the neighbor villages to join them. And it was under his leadership and initiative, 95 villages joined and formed a huge kind of a group who protected over 5,000 hectares of sal forest. In 10 years, 5 years it started giving results. In 10 years, it was converted into a deep forest. So much so that a stream which went dry when there was no forest, it again sprang up, wildlife came back, and they were happy with what they used to get probably 50 years ago. So what I'm trying to tell you, and yes, after the success of Budi Khamari, the first village was Budi Khamari. After the success of Budi Khamari, other villages in that village, some 80 kilometers away, some 60 kilometers away, they also started thinking in the similar line. So in 5-10 years, the total forest cover of Mayurbhanj grew. It all happened because of just one man, right? And if we talk about that one person, if we talk about the work that he has done, this will have, it did have, in the case of Budi Khamari, it will have a ripple effect. That aura of positivity is necessary in present time when skepticism runs the rule. এখানে কিচ্ছু হবে না, কিচ্ছু হয় না, লোক সব চোর, লোক সব বোকা, লোক সব একদম অলস. Nothing happens here. That is the impression that we carry all the time. So stories about this positivity, you know, common people doing uncommon things, will also spread positivity in the society, which is needed. Now, question. Sir, will we only talk about rural people? Will we have to go to rural areas to do development journalism? Answer, no, definitely not. As Dr. Ray explained, and I told you also, the development has several criteria. You can pick up any criteria, you can focus on any criteria, any place. You can talk about people living in urban slums. You can talk about people living anywhere. You can talk not only about poverty. You can talk about anything that impairs development, right? Or impacts development negatively. You can talk about anything, right? From development perspective. So therefore, science journalism in a way, if you look from development perspective, could be development journalism. Let me give you an example. Consider climate change, right? We are constantly told that the temperature is rising. But at the ground level, what are the implications? Go to Sundarban. Go to, if you are in Odisha, go to Bhitarkanika. The topography is almost the same, right? Sea is rising and sea is eating villages after villages. In Bhitarkanika, in the last 7 to 10 years, almost 20 villages have perished. It has just gone into the sea. It's because the sea water has risen, right? So those are the areas, if you talk about that from development perspective, look at these people. They are probably environmental refugees. And how do you engage with this problem? What we need to do, short term, long term. Maybe you can talk with the experts. If you write from this aspect, it becomes development journalism, although you are talking about environment. Right? Consider science journalism. If you look again from development perspective, it could be development journalism, right? Similar in other areas also. Now, sir, where do I get information from and how do I structure my stories, right? First, how do you structure your stories? And then we will talk about where do you get information. I understand there is a separate session for data journalism. I'll not go into that. But I'll tell you first how to structure this story. Development journalism, if you are writing stories, you may not take the route of 5W1H, put everything in one paragraph, inverted style of writing. Don't go that way. Go narrative journalism way, right? Tell a story. And we always say, tell a story with a human face, right? Of course, you will be giving data. Of course, you will be quoting figures. But data, figure, they are just numbers. You have to put a human face into it. Let me give you 2-3 examples. One example from P. Sainath's book. Everybody loves a good drought. I think you should read that book if you haven't yet. In one of the stories, she talks about the plight of persons whose sole job is to ride up to the palm tree. Palm tree মানে বুঝতে পারছো তো, তাল গাছ। তাল গাছ চড়বে, ওখান থেকে আইদার তাল আনবে, পাকা হোক বা কাঁচা হোক, ওটা ওদের প্রফেশন। Like in Bengal also, we have a total community who produces Shitulia bole, who produces this Nolen good, Khejure good jeta amra boli. It's a community. This story is from Andhra Pradesh. In Andhra Pradesh, there is a community who do this. And every day, probably they ride off about 20 palm tree, right? So the way P. Sainath starts the story is, every day so-and-so goes up the Empire State Building so many times, right? He has calculated the average length of a palm tree and the times that somebody has to ride, and he has figured out the height of Empire State Building. But the way he starts, it's startling. So my advice will be, you start with a human face. You start with a story. You start in a way which will suck the audience, readers, viewers, whoever, into this story, right? Sir, how do I get this story? Look around you. You have stories everywhere around you. Go to any public institution. You have story waiting for you to be told, right? I'll come back to that. Where do you look at stories for development journalism? So first, begin with the human face. Talk about him or her. If you are talking about child bride, child marriage, in present day also 2022, yes, child marriage is prevalent. Child marriage is prevalent in West Bengal also, right? Considered to be a progressive state. And unfortunately, during this pandemic, the average age of marriage is coming down, not going up, right? That's another thing. So maybe you can talk about that. So if you are talking about that from development perspective, try to find out one such child bride. Talk about her story, a real story, right? And then you talk about the problem. So from micro, move to macro, not the other way. Micro to macro, right? But this is what I'm telling you, it's not sacrosanct. I mean, every time you write a development journal story, you start with this. No, I mean, you take your take, but this is one good way to begin it. So start from micro, move to macro. what is the macro picture. And when you are talking about macro picture, right, you have to get credible data. Where do you get this data from? There are presently, thanks to digital technology and thanks to the analytics, which has made big data aggregation easier, you have data available on internet. The only problem is you have to figure out where do I get them from, which website do I get them from. Look at census data. This is a thumb rule. Look at census data. Look at National Health Service data. Look at crime bureau, crime data. So these are, I guess, Dr. Pandey has compiled a list of areas from where you get data from. Huge data, credible data, verified data, right? However, getting data is one thing. Analyzing data and interpreting data is another thing. For that, you need to keep your mind open, right? And look at the data intensely. About that, data journalism, how do you use data? We have a separate session. We will tell more about that. The fact that I'm trying to convince you about is start with a human face, start with story of a person, then move to the issue. If the issue is child marriage, move to big data. If the issue is, well, retardation of learning, move to big data. Start from micro, move to macro. Okay? And then how do you end? You can end in 2, 3, 4 ways. One way of ending is leaving after you have posited the problem. This is one way of doing it. Second way of doing it, you end with what the government is doing it part. Third way, maybe you can go one step further and try to find out solutions. You ask experts, you go there, observe, ask experts, and then try to give solutions. That's another way of doing it, right? This is how you structure your story. 2, 3 things that you need to be aware of. Do emphasize. You have to have that empathy, right? But do not be sentimental. There is a difference between having empathy and being sentimental, right? Do not be sentimental about when you, most of you are students, I understand, and at that age, it's very easy to be sentimental, right? Journalism doesn't work on sentiments. Empathy is something deeper. You must have empathy. If you have empathy, then only you can write good development stories, because you put yourself in their places, right? Getting sentimental will take you practically nowhere. Right? If you get sentimental, you will not get to the root cause of that problem. Get my point? So do not be sentimental, but do empathize with the problem. What kind of language do I use, sir? Consider you are writing a story. Write straight from your heart. Right? That's the best way of writing a development story. From the heart, but without losing track of your head. Because you are practicing journalism, and journalism is all about facts and facts. And third is ethical reporting. When you are writing about development, when you are writing about something that you really do feel very strongly about, you must go for ethical reporting. Now, ethics and law may not always agree, right? Consider at one point of time, this bride burning was not against law. A law was made afterwards. Consider at one time apartheid was not illegal. Consider at one time, people were bought and sold. Pritadash Pratha. That was perfectly legal. Till some people agitated against it and a law came up. And there were people supporting this and ensuring that this heinous tradition stops. So everything that is legal may not be ethical, right? So what I'm trying to impress upon you is that development journalism has a strong element of ethics in it. Nyaya, justice. So development journalism rests on two solid pillars. Development rests on 4, development journalism rests on 2, or I'll add another letter. The primary 2 pillar is Satya, which is fact, and justice, Nyaya. Satya and Nyaya. These are the 2 major pillars of development journalism. In fact, these are the 2 major pillars of journalism. But here, in case of development journalism, it becomes critical. It has to be there. Without Satya, without Nyaya, there cannot be any development journalism. Right? To end, some caveat. The first kind of development journalism that I told you, journalism for development. Here in this case, a goal is set and you are impressed upon to impress on people to follow that. Consider iodized salt. The government decides that people should be given iodized salt, right? And you also write stories so that people read your story and are encouraged to use iodized salt, right? I'll expect you to go just one step further. At times, critically look at the basic premise of development. You also can look at that. And maybe you can suggest alternatives to development, to the way development is carried forward. So in the first kind of development journalism, there is a caveat, right? If you are convinced, well, this has to be followed. If you are convinced by credible sources, if you are convinced by credible facts, right, then please go ahead and do it. But do check, right? Second kind, you analyze and you write if it is not wrong, or if it's going, it's somewhere something is not right. That's also development journalism. Okay. But better story would be the third one, where you also dovetail a roadmap to solution. Okay, this is the problem. Okay, these are the These are the sets of problems that need to be engaged with, that needs to be contained, so that the development can happen. Right? This is the way. That's solution journalism. So development journalism is just another form of journalism. It's not very different. I mean, the way journalism is practiced is the way to practice development journalism. But there are certain specialized tools that you need to acquire, and in a certain way that you need to write and present those stories. With that, I end. I'm leaving 9 minutes for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for so much clarity on the subject. Students, you have time for questions on development journalism or anything else that you want to ask, sir. So please go ahead. If you want, sir speaks Bangla as well. You can ask him in Bengali as well.
But my Bangla will be atrocious. I have been living in Odisha for 50 years. My Bangla, oh my God. Tobuo, bolbo to nishchoy Bangla. If the question comes in Bangla.
Shobai acho? Are you there, students?
Yes,
Or-
sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
God bless you. Thank you so much. So do you have any questions for sir? So this was, 2 years ago, 14th March 2020. This was the last working day for us here in West Bengal, because 15th March was a Sunday, I guess. And that is when, everything turned, and we had that huge lockdown. And then this is when, we are having a lot of offline events as well. But I really thank our students for being present here in such numbers. It's really very nice of you. And as we had, discussions early in the morning, and Mr. Charita Vardhan, would you like to come in now?
If I may add,
Sir.
Professor Pandey,
Sir.
maybe these students can watch Khabar Lahariya, which has been in the Oscar list, how they are practicing development journalism. Maybe some of the students can check out PARI website. PARI is People's Archive for Rural India, one initiative by P. Saina. Maybe you can check it out. Maybe you can see Gaon Connection, Gaon, Gaon Connection. Nilesh Mishra is involved with this initiative. Maybe you can check it out. You can also check Radio Namaskar. It's a community radio station in Odisha, how they are making programs which are the purpose of which is to bring about changes, bring about development in the community. Maybe you can check it out. Thank you. Yes, Khabar Lahariya, Gaon Connection, Radio Namaskar, PARI, P-A-R-I, People's Archive for Rural India. That's the.
Thank you so much, sir. As you can see, I put that on the chat box as well. And as Ms. Vardhan said in our last workshop, these are just snapshots that we can discuss with you. Because in a 3-day session, and we, had a lot of planning on whether to keep it at 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours. And this was the 2.5 hour mark that we thought that after that point of time, students might not be in a position to take in more. So we decided to go in for these sessions, but as you can understand, these are very, very important sessions for you. And there are 2 important elements of which, one of which sir has spoken about today, which is about storytelling, and we'll touch upon on storytelling a bit in our other sessions also. And of course, data journalism, which is such an important part of journalism. I invite Ms. Charita Vardhan for her comments now.
Thank you, Dr. Pandey, and thank you, Professor Mrinal Chatterjee, for that wonderful session. It is always such a pleasure to listen to you, and I become a student every time you speak. And I mark some of your expressions, because I find them every time. I think it's a matter of reinforcing certain things, and I also take note of that. So thank you very much. And to all the students, I would say we appreciate sincerely the fact that it's going well beyond 9:15, 9:25 almost, and you're still here. And also because we've tried to kind of, have the best arrangement possible, knowing that your day sessions are packed since you've reopened college and you have a lot of work on hand. But the fact that your universities and all of you agreed to come and participate, and the fact that all of you stayed for so long itself, is a sincere acknowledgement from our side. And as Professor Amit Shobhan was mentioning, that it is in a capsule format, a lot to take. So perhaps you are assimilating the knowledge, the wisdom shared by some of these experts and exponents of the work. We have got the best for you, and I can assure you with that. And I'm hoping that you will be able to internalize it also as you assimilate various portions of what you learned today in terms of development economics, development journalism, storytelling, and all of it. From our side, I can only assure you that do not let your memory fade on this, because very soon, when you're out there into the domain and practicing professionals, I can tell you that you will recall this session. There are those instances in life, whether they're in school or college, you remember that one incident, that one quiz, that one mock parliament, that one session, that one webinar that happened. And I can assure you that this is going to be one among them. When you go out into your domain to practice, you will recall these as tenets that if you can hold on to them and practice them actually, you will be an acknowledged reporter, and a distinguished one at that. There are various pearls of wisdom that have been thrown at you. I hope that you will be able to pick each one of them and reflect a bit. You have made notes. There is going to be this recording which will be shared with you. There is immense wealth shared. So please look back, hear, and recall some of the things that were left for you by Professor Amit Shobhan, by Professor Dr. Mrinal Chatterjee. And then maybe if you do have some comments, some reviews, even some feedback, do not hesitate to get back to us. We are very hopeful that students who will be the prospective journalists will show the way for a kind of journalism that stretches beyond your breaking news, beyond the kind of sensationalization and reactive journalism, and takes us on the path of very well-written, quality, evidence-based, appealing storytelling, which talks about people and their issues, their news. With that, I'm hoping that you have been with us very sincerely, and we will not stop you from your dinner. So let me hand it back to Dr. USP, Aruma Shankar Pandey, and I think he will close or conclude for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sucharita, for putting it so beautifully. I mean, I'm sure these takeaways will be there with them, for long, and as it is for us, these wonderful learning experiences. One request to students tomorrow, if you can, it's possible for you, if you can sit with a laptop, because there will be some demonstrations on data journalism. So if you can have a laptop, then you can click on those links, or you can even do one of those very simple filtering exercises that we want to share with you. As we are suggesting that there are so many things to be done there, but we want to provoke you into these areas. That's why there are lots and lots of resources that we have for you tomorrow and day after. So tomorrow there will be 2 sessions only. The first one will be on data journalism, and the second one will be on fact checking. But as we do data journalism, we'll have a small interjection on storytelling as well, because that's important we think. And then we have the day 3 coming up as well. If you have suggestions, I'll request our colleague Mr. Devan Bhaduri to kindly share the email ID, the official email ID on the chat box. Please do write to us. We are all accessible, and I know most of these students, they're all known faces, although they're hiding behind the screen now, but I'll make sure that on the last day we have a video of you, or at least you open your camera so that we can have a proper, kind of a screenshot that we always do, so that, that stays in digital memory for a long, long time. So thank you again. I mean, your presence is really very, very important for us. And we hope to, carry on these conversations for long.